and welcome to another episode of Gossip Finance, where I am your host, Alacias Enger.
And I'm Duncan Sandlin. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Alacias. How's it going?
Good. My goodness, it's been so busy in the news, Duncan. I feel like we need to jump right in because
absolutely.
I feel like the world's gone crazy.
Oh, it has
absolutely
gone crazy. So we're going to talk about, we're going to go, mainly today, we're just going to go over the Supreme Court and their big rulings for the end of June, and all the craziness going on with that. So we'll talk about that, but I want to dive right in. So the first case we wanted to talk about was the ruling on the LGBTQ wedding design, web design lady, right? So just to give you sort of the basics. So this woman in Colorado. So in Colorado, it's you can't deny somebody based on their gender or their sexual orientation or skin color, right? For service, right? It's the same reason we don't have segregated restaurants anymore, right? This was decided years ago that sexual orientation was also a protected class under that ruling, and so she did what's kind of a weird thing where she filed saying, "Well, I do web design for weddings, right?" And there was this guy, Stuart, and his fiance, Mike, and they wanted me to do a wedding website for them. And I'm refusing and I'm challenging the law, right? So we're going to look a little bit. This is just sort of the case. She won this in the Supreme Court, so she doesn't have to under religious freedom, under First Amendment rights. But this was sort of the basis of what was going on.
Now at 10:30, the Supreme Court deals a devastating blow to LGBTQ protections, ruling businesses can refuse service to same-sex customers in some cases. Now the justices ruled in favor of a Christian web designer in Colorado who refused to create a website based on her religious beliefs and First Amendment rights.
John Fenolio live at our news center with a look at what the ruling means and its far-reaching implications. John.
Sure, Micah. That web designer says she's an evangelical Christian who doesn't believe in gay marriage and wants to refuse her services to LGBTQ couples. She argued before the court that she was protected by her First Amendment rights of free speech and expression. The Supreme Court agreed. Now critics worry the ruling will invite more discrimination against LGBTQ people.
And it wasn't just that in the criticism. In the dissenting opinion, they also pointed out, well, I mean, if you can do that for a religious exemption, I could start a religion where I don't believe white people should be allowed out in public. And now if one of them comes into my store, I could say, well, this is against my religion. You're violating my freedom of speech rights for me to have to serve you. Right? Or do any work for you. So, I mean, it just opens up a huge can of worms, which is hard to put back in the box.
This is so interesting to me because I've got thoughts and feelings that go in different directions. So for our viewers, I don't know if this has ever come up in an episode. I really don't remember. I'm bisexual. I'm a part of the gay community, and I have multiple feelings in like kind of two different directions. I can't speak for everybody. I only speak for myself, but I don't particularly want to give my money to a business person that is against serving me.
Sure.
Because of my sexual orientation. I vote with my dollar, and I don't want to vote with my dollar in favor of their small business.
Sure.
So I automatically don't want to give my business to somebody who really doesn't want to be serving me. Simultaneously, I really feel like it's dangerous and super scary that we've just said that it's okay by law to deny service to somebody on that basis in what is a protected designation, or supposed to be. I guess maybe it's not so protected.
Sure.
But those are feelings in two different ways. Why you want to vote with your dollar, the fact that somebody can just like literally decide. So what is there going to be a grocery store now that like if I'm known as bisexual, I can't like suddenly shop at this grocery store because the person who owns this little grocery market doesn't like gay people?
Yeah, well, I mean, they could do that, but gay's not allowed in Hobby Lobby, right? That was the Hobby Lobby case, right? Yeah. But it doesn't. It's not just that. It's I think it's odd too, coming off of the other big case was Bostock versus Clayton in 2020, and what that was the guy Bostock got fired for being gay from his job, and that was legal in the state he lived in. There was no federal protection for that, and it wasn't until 2020 that the Supreme Court said in a 6-3 ruling, well, actually, no, you can't fire somebody because they're gay or evict somebody because they're gay. But it was still legal in this country, federally, to do that up until 2020, which is 3 years ago. So the fact that, like, I sort of get where you have feelings on this, because it's like, how would you feel if your rights were up for a ruling by the Supreme Court? Right? And that's kind of...
Well, my rights keep being up for rulings on the Supreme Court. They are dictating, my reproductive rights, whether people can give me service. So apparently I've got to carry whatever babies the Supreme Court has decided I need to carry, and people don't have to serve me because I'm a bisexual female.
Yeah.
And what else do you feel like taking from me?
Yeah, I know, but that's where it kind of goes. What's funny about this case is she technically sort of had standing, but this is what's so funny about it. But let me
Duncan, let's pause here.
Sure.
Standing.
Oh, standing.
When you say she has standing.
Oh, she has a right to bring
elevator version again.
She has the right to bring the lawsuit. She can show harm. Right.
Okay, and so just for our audience, you have to be able to prove that you have standing before your case can even get seen.
Right.
It can be thrown out before it's ever seen if they say you don't even have a right to bring this to our attention.
Right.
Basically.
Right. Now, on there's a thing called preemptive standing, where, like, if I want to challenge an existing law because I want to be able to break that law, I can then bring a case like that. And that's kind of what sort of how they spun this here. Though it doesn't really make sense why they would. They did. But this is what's funny. The case was based on, she claimed this guy and his fiance asked her to make a wedding website. Why don't I let the news tell you more about this? So this is Democracy Now! Here we go.
Now, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, the Supreme Court issues 2 more decisions, including one brought by a Colorado wedding website designer who wants to be allowed to refuse service to same-sex couples. Lori Smith filed a lawsuit with help from the right-wing Alliance Defending Freedom as part of the group's ongoing attacks on the rights of LGBTQIA people. Smith said a Colorado law that bars businesses from refusing to sell a product to gay couples is a violation of her right to free speech as someone who opposes same-sex marriage. But new reporting shows Smith never once made a wedding website, and a key document in the case may be fake. For more, we're joined by Melissa Gira-Grant, staff writer.
Oh, yeah. She doesn't even have a wedding website business. She's never made one.
This just keeps getting stupider and stupider.
So this whole thing is, we're ruling on a hypothetical of what something might happen. You can technically do that with a preemptive law, but typically you do that before the law is put in place. You don't do that after the law has been in place for years and years and years. Because we have the data on how that law has actually affected people. And it hasn't in any negative way. Right? So here's the whole deal. So the whole sham website customer, right? So it turns out they tracked this guy Stewart down. Let me get rid of this ad here. Look at her looking all contemplative. They tracked him down. He doesn't know who she is. He's never. He says here, I wouldn't want anybody to make me a wedding website. The man identified only as Stuart, right? This is the guy. I'm married. I have a child. He's married to a woman, too. He's straight. I'm not really sure where that came from, but somebody's using false information in a Supreme Court filing document. So the guy that she said was that she's complaining against never asked for a website. So this whole thing was she's basically a Republican plant. They made the whole thing up just so they could get it to the Supreme Court. Because they knew with a conservative Supreme Court they could win it. So the whole case was fake going in. And the Supreme Court bought it.
So this gives me really very, very little faith, and it's not even just because I'm a liberal-leaning person, but our own Supreme Court can get faked out that easily.
No.
I know that.
No, they're just making shit up at this point. That's the point. They don't care. They're just making stuff up because they know they can. They have a 6-3 majority. We don't actually have to justify why we're doing shit. That's the problem. That's why when people say the Supreme Court's illegitimate or they're criticizing the Supreme Court, you've got Clarence Thomas.
They feel illegitimate.
Yeah.
I don't blame people for saying that. It feels that way for sure.
You got Clarence Thomas taking free vacations, Alito taking free vacations, Thomas's wife taking money from conservative PACs. You know, they're hearing cases from these guys they're taking money from. Who else got tagged? John Roberts' wife took money, and he's the Chief Justice. And now they're saying, man, we don't have to justify anything. We're just untouchable, which they kind of are. Then you kind of have to sit there and go, what's the point? Because right now they're making legislation. They're supposed to just be interpreting the law. This is actually making legislation. Right? They're not interpreting legislation. So, yeah. So I think that's, just goes to show you, I mean, for the gay community, you took 2 steps forward in 2020 and there's another step back. It can always get worse, but, the long arc of history, always leans left. But the bottom line is they can knock it back every once in a while. And you're going to make up all that progress again. So here's another one. This is upcoming, but this isn't. It hasn't been ruled on yet, but we can guess probably how they're going to rule. So this is the Supreme Court is going to have a case coming up where they can decide whether or not to make it illegal for the government to institute a wealth tax on the rich, even though we don't have a wealth tax.
So again. They're just making shit up.
It's just
literally.
It's just a preemptive.
Literally.
Well, you know why? Because the idea of a wealth tax is becoming more and more popular, and it has for a long time, because it would solve a lot of problems.
So let's frame that. It's becoming popular because of why?
Because the wealth gap in this country has gotten so big.
That's true. We've done work around that in other episodes, you know?
And we talked about this before. Like the issue is you can fix the income tax system, and that's a good thing to do. You can also, but the problem is the wealthy, they've already accumulated all this money, and now it just keeps growing and growing and growing through investments, right? And you're not going to stop that. So the only way you can balance that out is by issuing what's called a wealth tax, right? So if your net worth is X above X, right, then you have to pay this amount every year, right? Or if your earnings make this amount, you have to pay tax on that, right? That's what a wealth tax would essentially look like in a, just sort of nutshell version. Now, why is this important? It's important because it prevents people from getting huge advantages like, oh, I don't know, Elon Musk, the Koch brothers, Mark Zuckerberg, where you have billionaires who can literally buy chunks of media that we consume and tell us what they want. Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, right? Fox News they're not news, they're not journalists, they're propaganda. They're not even listed as journalists. And every time they've gone to court, they said, we're not news, we're entertainment, right?
Right.
But people watch it religiously like it's the news, and they believe it's the news, and they just spew whatever right-wing propaganda they're told to spew. And they get paid a lot of money to do that. Look at Elon Musk buying Twitter. Now, Twitter is so restrictive. It's, you go on Twitter, it's mostly Nazis anymore. You don't see it's...
Yeah. The truth of the matter is I have really not been on Twitter. I used to spend a fair amount of Twitter time, as a writer, for my business. And it's gotten so frustrating on there. Who wants to be bothered with it anymore?
Right. But now he controls that platform because he had the money. He had $42 billion to blow. Right. So just that right there, being able to donate to politicians. The Koch brothers donated billions and billions of dollars to politicians. That can change a political race pretty quickly. So now, just by the virtue of being a billionaire, you have a lot of power and a lot of say in this country. So wealth tax is an attractive thing because it's like, well, wait a second. If you're not that wealthy, you can't do that, then it makes the country more democratic. Because now your dollars you don't have those dollars, so you can't tip your hand on the scale as easy anymore. That's part of the big attraction to a wealth tax from just a socioeconomic perspective, right? Not just a financial perspective. Plus the benefit of having that money to distribute to people that actually can use it or to improve the economy or the workforce is probably a better thing. But yeah, we'll look at this real quick on this discussion about the wealth tax.
Well, we are waiting for some key decisions from the Supreme Court this week. The High Court already, though, adding a controversial case to its docket for later this year. That could throw a wrench into Democrat plans to tax the wealthy. Rick Newman is here. Rick, this has got a lot of people talking already.
Yeah, it's arcane. I'll try to stay out of the weeds, but it is interesting. So part of the 2017 tax cut, which Republicans passed without any Democrats on board, included a repatriation tax, which didn't affect a lot of people, but basically it said that any Americans who own a certain stake above a threshold in any foreign companies, that they had to pay tax to the U.S. government on that stake as if it were a capital gain. In other words, as if they actually sold their shares in that company, even if they didn't sell the shares. So it would be like if you owned Apple stock here in the United States, you would get taxed on the value of that Apple stock instead of getting taxed on the gain in the stock once you sold it. So there was a couple in Washington State that had to pay almost $15,000 in tax. They protested. They lost on appeal. They lost on a second appeal, and now it's at the Supreme Court. And the reason this matters is this is basically the same principle as a wealth tax that Elizabeth Warren was one of her big proposals when she ran for president in 2020, a wealth tax. So you tax people on their wealth, not on their income, which means on the amount of stuff they hold, not on the amount of stuff they sell. So if the Supreme Court would say, yeah, this is possible, then it opens the door to a wealth tax. And on the other hand, if the Supreme Court says, no, this is not valid, two things. It's going to basically say there is no basis for a wealth tax. And number two, the government's going to have to give back some tax money it collected. And overall, it expected to get about $400 billion over 10 years or something like $40 billion a year. So it matters. But as you pointed out, we're not going to get to this until later this year. And meanwhile, we're probably going to have some momentous decisions coming later this week.
So I thought that was pretty amazing because the couple things about that are, one, this is the Paul Ryan, Donald Trump tax plan. Initially proposed what is basically a wealth tax for foreign investments. And now they're pissed about it, right? Now it's coming back, right? On top of that fact, what I think is so funny about it, because he's talking about this. Yeah, we expected this thing would generate some 400 billion, right? Well, what was the student debt relief going to be from the Biden plan? Around 400 billion. So it's one of those things where it's like, dude, you don't want to pay for it, and you don't want to pay. Period. I mean, that's all it is at the end of the day. And we'll see what the Supreme Court does. I would bet dollars to pesos they roll with it.
Probably.
Yeah, I bet you they.
I mean, they're basically bought and paid for at this point anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, the other big ones, we'll go through the big ones we wanted to talk about. So, student loans. So, first off, before student loans, we had to talk about they basically swatted down affirmative action in colleges. And so this is going to be kind of a big issue. Let's watch this a little bit, and then let's get into why this is such a big issue. And maybe what we'll do is we'll have Michelle Sandlin, who's my mother, has worked in higher ed for 43 years, and she's pretty active in this, or was pretty active in this before she retired this year. And then she was recently in an article for NPR about this, and this is a lot of this is in her book. So we can hopefully we'll get an interview with her, and we'll add that this weekend if we get a chance. But let's go ahead and jump right into the affirmative action thing.
We begin tonight with the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action and reshaping college admissions. In a 6-3 decision, the justices ruled that Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution by considering race when deciding whether to admit someone to their school. A landmark case overturning nearly 50 years of precedent, the latest example of the conservative majority redefining American law, including abortion rights and guns. The ruling means higher education institutions will need to come up with new ways to create diverse student bodies. Groups of protesters, mostly made up of young adults, gathered outside the court to voice their outrage. And to underscore how monumental this case is, 6 of the 9 justices wrote opinions, many personal and strongly worded. CBS's Major Garrett has all the new details and will start us off tonight from outside the Supreme Court. Good evening, Major.
Good evening, Nora. Yes, it was personal, with justices on the touchstone issue of race talking to and past one another. This sweeping and historic ruling effectively ends affirmative action in college admissions, reversing decades of precedent that less conservative court majorities had protected, and giving colleges and universities some latitude to consider race as one factor as they sought to build more diverse student bodies.
All right, so we'll jump into a couple things there. I think that guy's first name was Major. I think he should have joined the military and worked his way up to the rank of major just so he could have been called Major.
All right, fair enough. Stupid jokes aside. All right. So here's the deal. We'll look at this article. So in affirmative action, I want everybody to understand, affirmative action could not give a mathematical advantage by race. Right. When you say a mathematical advantage, what do you mean?
That means that just because you're black or Hispanic or whatever, it doesn't mean you could have a better mathematical advantage of getting into school than a white person. Right. Or an Asian person. What it did is if you guys were like fairly equal and it came down between the two of you, the preferential would go to the minority race. But it wouldn't give you any sort of advantage. Like if I were black and my scores were way lower than yours and you were white, they would take the white kid. They would have to. They couldn't just pick me because I'm black, and they wanted to balance it out.
So it really only becomes much of a factor if the two people applying have identical scores. Basically.
Yeah, hypothetically.
Or basically end up being this, are essentially on paper the same candidate.
Right, but what ends up happening is when you do it that way, you started to see that more and more minorities were going to school, just drastically more. And I'll tell you what they did in California. They rolled back affirmative action back in the 90s, and within a year, the following year, the enrollment for African Americans dropped by 40% into these schools. And that's what it does, is it literally sets a bar where it's more difficult for Black kids and Latino kids and Native American kids, etc. And what ends up happening is a lot of them, after that becomes the case, is they sort of just give up, because their counselors would tell them there's no way you're getting into Berkeley. There's no way you're getting into UCLA. Right, because we come from a poor school. So it's not even worth trying. So they literally give up. So they looked at this from Indiana college admissions on how they were impacted. And I just thought this was interesting. So they're not clear how it'll affect everything, blah, blah, blah. They go through some of the history with Lyndon B. Johnson. For universities, affirmative action has largely meant that race is one of the factors considered as part of a student's application, and the practice is part of the efforts to both grow and maintain a diverse student body. The impacts of this doctrine are nuanced. Schools are barred from instituting racial quotas or using formulas that give students a mathematical advantage, what I just said. That's how it was, right? Under these two cases that came through the Supreme Court recently, one against Harvard and one against the University of North Carolina, the school's affirmative action policies have discriminated against white and Asian American applicants by giving preference to Black, Hispanic, and Native American applicants. What's interesting about this is, in the case, they brought up from the defense side, right, saying we want to keep affirmative action in place. They brought up the NAACP and all these student bodies that were Native American, African American. I mean, dozens and dozens of them spoke, right? They're saying from the plaintiff's side, it's Asians and whites that are being discriminated against because of this policy. No Asian groups stood up. And I don't know that there were any white groups. So there was no students saying they were being harmed. Once again, on the case, right? So it's an odd ruling.
Well, we keep seeing that over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an instance where nobody was actually standing up saying, I've been harmed, that is theoretically in the harmed group, right? Like, none of them are self-identifying.
Right.
No groups are self-identifying. Likewise, we saw the same thing with Mohila. Like, the Mohila situation brought down the student loan forgiveness situation, but Mohila didn't say they were harmed either.
Yeah, we'll get to that one in just a minute,
So
too.
we're
But
seeing-
yeah.
I know, like, previewing what we haven't talked about yet.
But
my point is that we're starting to see a pattern here where the Supreme Court no longer cares that the people are not saying they've been harmed. Somebody else is pointing out, oh, you got harmed. I don't get to go and maybe I get to sue people now. Who knows? But I don't get to go, bringing up legal cases saying Duncan got harmed, and so I want to bring a legal case up. Duncan's not complaining, but Duncan got harmed, and I now have an issue because Duncan got harmed, and so now I want to bring up this case because Duncan got harmed.
Right.
Meanwhile, Duncan's back there. He's just chilling. He's like, I'm fine.
Oh, Duncan's not even there. Duncan's somewhere else.
Didn't show up
because he doesn't give a shit.
Duncan's off doing. Yeah, you don't care. You're off doing your thing. I'm the one that's going crazy because I think you got harmed, and you're like, I'm good. Whatever. I'm fine.
Meanwhile, Duncan's sipping Mai Tais somewhere. Nobody, it's just, it's just ridiculous. So here's, I want to talk about this. So don't tell me I lost it. Oh, here, Ginny Lee, okay. NAACP Legal Defense Fund. They supported Harvard. They were the defense, right? He had a good quote here, though. The whole notion of whether or not you can consider... Oh, sorry. This one, gosh, this is just highlighting it. So this paragraph, this whole notion of whether you can consider race or should consider race in college admissions is really, in many ways, a perspective on our society and whether race matters or not, or whether it has an impact on people's lives. Do we ignore that and pretend that it doesn't exist, or do we tackle those racial inequalities and be race conscious so everyone is truly equal? Those are two very, very different perspectives on life and on scenarios, society in the United States. I think she nailed that.
Yeah.
You can't. So to sit there like Robert says, well, you can factor. You can't factor their race in admissions, but if they're writing like their student essay and they talk about their experience because of their race, you can factor that, but you can't factor their race. But if you don't factor their race, you're not factoring them, the person, because their experience is different. I don't know what it's like to be black.
If you're going to evaluate somebody holistically,
right.
The fact that I'm a woman, the fact that I'm bisexual factors in to my life experience and your ability to assess me as a holistic person. You can't say that you being male and Asian does not factor in to your life experience and who you are. They're not in and of themselves the only factors, but it certainly has colored your experience.
Absolutely. And that's my point, is you can't sit there and say, well, just ignore that portion of it. Right. Which is kind of what they're saying. And they've rendered it to the point where it's almost meaningless. So, granted, colleges will use holistic and stuff still, but holistic is a good thing. But the bottom line is it doesn't really solve the issue. And when you're talking especially about the bigger schools like Harvard or UCLA, or especially the Ivy League schools and stuff, they're not going to be able to follow through with this, and they're not going to, because there's not a real incentive to. Now, the other thing that's totally screwed up about this is legacy admissions are still cool.
Okay, so define for us what a legacy admission is.
Legacy admission is you have rich parents that went to that school, so you automatically get in, regardless of grades or...
This is my daddy's alma mater, so I get to go to that school.
Right. Gentlemen's admissions are probably still cool too, right? Like Jared Kushner got into Harvard, and Trump liked to talk about that a lot, and Ivanka did too. But his teachers were like, I don't know how he got into Harvard. And then, of course, what the news reporters found out later on was, oh, yeah, his father gave Harvard $3 million the year before he started there. So I wonder how he got into Harvard. The price for admission.
I'm sure it was his test scores.
Yeah. Imagine how stupid you have to be for your dad to shovel out $3 million for them to let you in. That's got to be a slow kid. But, I mean, we can go through this, but it is essentially going to push out, especially minority students. And then what ends up happening is, because you can't factor in race as much, it's going to change sort of how the awards programs go for some of these students, right? So can we factor in race when we give out scholarships as a college? Right? Because that's going to be a big factor, because statistically, Hispanic, Latino, and Native American kids are poor. Right? And as we've talked about many, many times, what's happened is we've paid less and less into public education, less and less every year. The Republicans cut it our whole lifetimes. And that's why college is so expensive. It's because it used to be the government paid for it, right? That's how the older generations went to school, the boomers and the Gen Xers. The government paid for most of their college. Now they're bitching about, why should we have to pay back your student loans? Because most of yours were prepaid. And now that you've created a system where you have to borrow all this money just to go to school, who gets pushed out first? The black kids, the Hispanic kids, the Native American kids, the Pacific Islander kids. Who are the ones that tend to go? Well, the kids who still have money. tend to be white and Asian. So, I mean, that's just all screwed up. We can look at more. I mean, it's just, there's a lot to this whole thing. You mind if I do one little quick thing with this article here? So this was a Slate article. We'll just look at this last one real quick. So this is the Supreme Court just bulldozed affirmative action. So basically, Chief Justice Roberts' opinion of the court carves two loopholes. Schools can still consider how applicants discuss how the race affected his or her life in an essay. I just discussed that. And be treated based on those experiences. He also exempted the military academies from holding this altogether. That was the other second interesting point. How is it that the military is exempted from banning affirmative action? The military can still use affirmative action, but universities can't.
So, what we're saying is that we want our minorities in certain places more than others. Is that maybe the message that's being delivered to us? Because it kind of seems like it.
Well, in what place do we want them versus where we don't? We want them in combat. We want them serving. We don't want them in college getting educated. I thought that was pretty creepy.
You know what? Our country has a history of that sort of thing, though. Let's think about it. Decades ago, what kinds of housing opportunities were being offered to people of color versus white folks? White folks were being offered,
redlining, yeah.
These different types of loans to be able to buy houses, and minorities were being offered the projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all being disguised as being helpful, and here, this is the gift we're giving you, and how we're helping you out. When you stop and you look at it, all it really is it's some creepy sort of tracking funneling system to funnel people into the place that decided they want them.
No, and then furthermore, the military system. I mean, but we did the drafts. The minorities got drafted first. And they got all the frontline assignments. If you want to look at it by percentage, we lost more black soldiers in Vietnam than we did white soldiers per capita. So you can't sit here and tell me that's. You can't tell me that there isn't some corruption there and there isn't some racism there. I'm not saying that's how it necessarily is today, but there is a design built in the system to do that, and this just exacerbates it. Right? I can't sit here and say Roberts is racist. What I can say is what he's doing or what they did is going to absolutely hurt a lot of minorities, and especially poor people. So we'll move on from that, because that's the affirmative action. I mean, that's kind of a big blow, but we'll see how it all plays out. Now, the one we've been harping on forever, student debt. Okay, so the student debt forgiveness, Biden was going to forgive up to $20,000 if you had a Pell Grant and $10,000 if you didn't. That got shot down by the Supreme Court. They found it unconstitutional. Under the HEROES Act, it was, it could have gone either way, except for with this court, we knew which way it was probably going to go. I mean, there wasn't really anything shocking. We thought, maybe there was a chance they'd go with the arguments, but nah, they didn't. So part of the problem with that is so now it's set to expire. So payments begin October 1st. Interest starts accruing in September, right? Well, the problem is a lot of people haven't been paying on this for years. A lot of people haven't paid on it at all that have just gotten out of school in the last 3 years. And we're still in a recovering economy after COVID. And now you're going to saddle some 40-something million people with loan payments again. What is that going to do, right? So this was from the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I'm just going to hit the highlights, talking about update on student loan borrowers' payments is a suspension set to expire. So this is what they were worried about. So more than 1 in 13 student loan borrowers are currently behind on other payment obligations, right? So these delinquencies are higher than they were before the pandemic. So people are still struggling, right? And you can say, well, wages went up, but yeah, they didn't beat inflation. So people are not exactly rolling in it. About 1 in 5 student loan borrowers have a risk factor that suggests they could struggle when scheduled payments resume. So that means 20% right there aren't necessarily going to be able to make their payments, right? Median scheduled payments on other debt obligations have increased 24%. So other debt payments these people have already increased and are larger for young borrowers, because a lot of these people are now trying to buy homes and get on with their careers and things like that. So they've taken on extra debt. And more than 4 in 10 borrowers in our sample will return to repayment with new student loan servicers. So they'll have a whole new servicer altogether. But if you look at it all together, you're looking at maybe 20% people going into potential default or having to go into deferment on these payments. So this is really devastating. So, what do you do, right? Going into this, well, Joe Biden has come up with sort of a temporary solution to this. Some of it's temporary, some of it's actually pretty good, and we'll go through it here in a second. But here's his little announcement on it.
The average amount forgiven in the PPP, the pandemic loan program, average amount forgiven was $70,000.
Let me qualify this too. So the big Republican argument against him is it's not fair that I should have to pay back somebody else's loans, which is kind of a stupid argument because it means you don't understand how taxes work. Because you think, oh, my tax dollars are going to pay back their loans. Your taxes already went to pay their loans, so it's gone. You're not getting it back. And we've done this before, where the fact is even if everybody was paying, right, they're not paying as much. So what ends up getting, a lot of it gets gobbled up in fees and interest, so it actually costs more money for the government. So those loans were going to grow every year anyway. So it just costs the taxpayers more and more anyway. So this doesn't solve it. His bigger, more direct argument is when we gave the PPP loans, right, during the pandemic, right, a lot of people got those and those were all forgiven. So to sit there and say it's not fair to forgive student loans, it's like, well, wait a second. A lot of these Republicans who are complaining about it, they took hundreds of thousands of dollars in loan forgiveness from that. And now they're celebrating that students are going to get stomped with the extra $10,000 debt.
God, it's so hypocritical. So hypocritical.
Yep. But
this isn't unlike, the thing we keep pointing out before, like, our favorite person, Mr. Ramsey himself, is completely against people having loan forgiveness when he's declared bankruptcy, which essentially is loan forgiveness.
A bankruptcy that bailed him out of a lot of trouble. And he got over $300,000 forgiven from the bankruptcy court.
Yet somebody else's 10 to 20,000.
Nope.
Unacceptable.
Yep. So that's what Biden's talking about. He's making the comparison.
For the pandemic loan program, average amount forgiven was $70,000. Now a kid making $60,000, trying to pay back his bills, asking for $10,000 in relief. Come on, the hypocrisy is stunning. Last year, I announced my student debt relief plan, a plan that was on the verge of providing more than 40 million Americans with real debt relief, up to $10,000 for many borrowers and up to $20,000 for those who had gotten a Pell Grant. Nearly 90% of the relief would have gone to borrowers, 90% of it, making less than $75,000 a year. And no one making over $125,000 a year would qualify. This program was all set to begin. 16 million people had already been approved. The money was literally about to go out the door. And then Republican elected officials and special interests stepped in. They said, no. We all supported the Paycheck Protection Program. Remember PPP? Which was designed to help business owners who lost money because of the pandemic. It was a worthy program. But let's be clear. Some of the same elected Republicans, members of Congress who strongly opposed giving release to students, got hundreds of thousands of dollars themselves in relief, members of Congress, because of the businesses they were able to keep open. I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling.
All right, so we'll go through with the path, but that was his whole point. Like you just said, it's just the hypocrisy of the whole thing is ridiculous, right? Now, what he's done is this. So this was his immediate response. So he saw this coming, or at least his aides did. So first off, interest starts September 1st. October 1st, payments begin again. If you can't make your payments, or you're going to struggle to make your payments, or you're struggling to make your payments, you can, set it up right now. They give you what's called the on-ramp program. And essentially it's 12 months. They'll give you student debt relief. They won't charge you extra interest. It won't affect your credit score. So if you need relief and you can't pay them right away, you can go file for that. You'll get an extra year of basically debt forgiveness, right? Or not forgiveness, but just, the moratorium, right? So you won't have to pay it right away. So there's an extra year right there if you need it, right? And you can do that without accruing any more interest or damaging your credit score. So I think that's a wonderful thing right there for people who can't pay it, right? Do you have any thoughts on that, or you just...
No, just we can keep going.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad at least there's kind of a temporary on-ramp sort of situation for people, because I do believe that this has the ability to be a devastating blow to the economy overall. Like it's a pretty bad setup.
And 40 million people, yeah.
Because this is right. I mean, and if 40 million people feel like they can't afford this, 40 million people are also not going to be spending money in other areas, which is going to be an absolutely devastating blow for the economy overall.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who've been worried about the economy tanking should get a little more worried instead of a little less worried. Right. That's really what my thought process is. I'm really glad for the individual there's kind of like an on-ramp situation to sort of maybe help ease people into this, but it's still I don't know, if I'm looking in my crystal ball, I'm seeing this as a pretty devastating overall economy blow.
Not necessarily, because the other thing is now you can pretty much everybody can qualify for an IDR, an income-driven repayment. And that is now factored in as 5% of your discretionary income. So it's a small amount. So people making under 35,000, pay nothing. And as long as you pay that payment, whether it's a nothing or $50 or whatever it is, right, the interest will not increase, right, on the total amount. So if the total you borrowed was $25,000, as long as you're making your income-driven repayment, it'll never go above $25,000. Okay? If your initial balance was under $12,500 and you make that income-driven repayment, or any payment, and you make 10 years worth of payments in a row, right? So 120 payments in a row, they'll forgive that $12,500 if your loan is beneath that. Okay?
Okay, so say that one again. How does that part work again?
So if your initial loan was less than $12,500 and you make 10 years worth of payments, even if the payment's nothing, but you make it every year or make it every month, if you make those payments for 10 years in a row, they'll forgive that $12,500. So people with like community college, stuff like that.
Right. Right. So this seems like the person maybe who was a little conservative in their choices. They went to community college. They did still have to take out a little bit of loan, but maybe not a ton. And that's going to be really good for that person because it doesn't seem to be tied to any particular type of employment. It's just you are making your payments for the appropriate amount of time.
Right. If you are struggling and whatnot, there are default programs and deferment processes. But if you're in default or if you're 75 days late on a payment, they automatically enroll you into income-driven repayment.
I mean, actually, I love that part. I mean, generally speaking, if you're struggling to make payments, that's what you need to do anyway. We've always offered that suggestion to people because you want to be on top of your payments, but you need to be able to afford them. But I do love that they're being sort of proactive in that people who don't do that for themselves
or don't know about this or are not paying attention.
Right, because sometimes it's like life is super crazy and you're juggling a lot of things and that maybe just fell off your radar or you didn't totally realize what your options were, that they'll get shifted into one of those, maybe notified about it, and hopefully in the process that becomes a little bit of education hit for them that it's even an option for them.
Right. So go ahead.
I just want to go back to what you're saying. I agree with you on everything you're saying, in that these repayment systems that they've been revamping are significant improvement and better for people's monthly budgets than any of the ones in the past were. I'm still offering a suggestion that I think this still has the ability to be kind of bad for the economy overall because people have been used to not making $0 payments. So yes, if instead of a $500 payment, I'm going to have a $300 payment because of the way they're formulated now. That's great, but I still have been making a $0 payment for 3 years. Right. So what I feel like I'm needing to absorb into my monthly budget is still going to feel really huge compared to the zero. Sure,
but like a $300 payment, you'd have to be making probably what, 60 or 70,000, 80,000 a year, something like that. So the required payments are not going to be as big. Now, once again, the income-driven repayments, they don't eat away at principal. They're just based on your income. So it doesn't lower the amount you owe over time. So it never, the loan doesn't really go away. You just pay that payment until you die, unless you want to start paying more and pay off the loan, right? But what it does is, in the meantime, if you're somebody who's only making $50,000 or $60,000 a year and you've got kids or whatever, now you're not strapped for this. Well, we're going to charge you $200 a month for your student loan. We're going to charge you $30.
Right.
Okay, or $20.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind, granted, nobody wants to be paying this for 20 or 25 years. There's the forgiveness that's associated with income-based repayment, that after 20 to 25 years of payments, those loans can become forgiven, which isn't optimal. Nobody wants to be paying over 20 to 25 years, but that's one of the things that are there, and it's one of the things they're recounting. So people actually could be seeing some relief through a whole other avenue right now, which, I'm hopeful that a lot of people experience that because they could stand to get out from under some of this.
Well, right. I mean, if you're looking at just paying off your loans and you have that kind of money, this doesn't really apply to you. You have the money.
Right.
If you're somebody who's lower income, middle to lower income, and this is going to be a struggle, this is a way to postpone it a little bit without harming you or your credit or adding more interest on your loan. Right? Until you're in a better position to start paying it off. That's what this is. This is not, we're not talking to the guy making $100,000 plus a year. We're not talking to somebody making $90,000 a year even, or $80,000. We're talking to somebody who's making less than $60,000. This is probably like he said, your kid making $60,000, just trying to pay your bills. This is just so you can get by until you can get into a better position. Because otherwise what ends up happening is we end up charging you this now. Now you're in a worse position. It's harder for you to switch jobs or move up or do anything because you're getting sucked out every month from this loan. Right, which was kind of the point here. So income-driven repayment, automatic after 75 days without a payment, or if you're already in default, they're going to do some credit towards forgiveness and deferments for unemployment, people with cancer, the military, and all the other benefit stuff. I want to point out that, income-driven repayment is going to be low. If you're struggling, that's what you should sign up for. I think in general, you should just sign up for it. And when you're ready to start paying more, you just pay more. But I think in general, you should just have that as that's the minimum in case that's all I can afford this month. Right? Is to pay the absolute minimum. But the bottom line is we've lowered it enough that it's now feasible that these people aren't going to go drowning over the next year.
Right.
Which I think is a good strategy. Plus, he's up for re-election next year, so he doesn't. That's all he needs is for this to come running around and biting him back in October, right?
Right, which is sad because actually none of it is really from his doing,
No, but it also buys his team another year to come up with, well, what's another option that we have? What else can we do?
Right.
So we're gonna finish this out real quick with have him talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah. Hours after the Supreme Court struck down his student loan forgiveness program proposed under pandemic emergency powers, the president vowed to take action by using the Higher Education Act.
This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief.
Borrowers like Rob Novickus, who owes roughly $50,000 in student loan debt.
It's frustrating. I have my daughter. We have a mortgage, credit card debt. So to know that in another month or two, I'm going to have an additional $500 to pay, it's tough.
But Republican presidential candidates this weekend pushed back on the criticism of the court.
When the court makes decisions that they don't like, all of a sudden the court is, a not normal court, according to President Biden.
And widely hailed the Supreme Court's ruling to strike down affirmative action in college admissions.
There may have been a time when affirmative action was necessary, simply to open the doors of all of our schools and universities.
You find the whitest guy ever. Affirmative action isn't necessary anymore. You remember when Trump's people tried to hang me and I ran away?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, bad.
Yeah, find the white guy. Bring the white guy out there to say that.
He's the opposite of a silver fox.
And he's definitely the token expert on this. Seriously.
I'll go with a Snow White weasel. I don't know. Anyway, so that was so Biden's. At least there's something. It's one thing more than nothing. I can tell you that. Had this kicked in with nothing. That guy saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to owe $500," all of a sudden, actually would owe $500 all of a sudden. But now with this, he could sit there and go, "Well, wait a second, man. I got a kid. I got all this other shit." Now he might be in a position to get a reasonable payment, right?
Right.
But we're going to finish this up real quick. So the Dave Ramsey crew, our favorites, they're big fans of the show. They watch us every week. Send us love letters. Anyway, they don't. Anyway, they're gonna take their round to gloat because they're so glad about this whole thing. But they're gonna gloat without gloating because they don't want to gloat. You ready?
No, but here we go.
Well, a big news hit just a few moments ago that the student loan forgiveness is not happening. It is official now. The Supreme Court officially struck down Biden's student loan debt relief plan that would have forgiven up to $20,000 for federal student loan borrowers. And Rachel and I put an Instagram story out, just kind of sharing the news and giving people some next steps.
In a meeting And, the texts were coming in that the Supreme Court had ruled this, and it was like, oh my gosh, because we've been talking about this for 18 months.
It feels like 7 years
A
from the
long
moment
time.
it was announced.
A long time. And if you've been listening to the show, you know that our number one thing for you guys is that we want you debt free. We want you out of debt. So we're like, listen, if this passes and you take advantage of it, go. That's great. If you have a moral conviction against it, then don't. But it's not passed yet. Don't wait on someone else, to make this.
See, we want you to be debt free, but is your favorite person Rachel? You can skip ahead a little bit here, but
my favorite.
Yep. Well, but I mean, they're kind of. This is their sort of their. We're not gloating, right?
But we told you so.
All right. I'm not going to say I told you so, but I told you so. So here we go. We'll finish. I just want to.
Because also, you guys, we hate student loans. We hate this whole industry. It is predatory. These 18-year-olds sign their lives away, and they have no clue what they're doing. The adults in their lives, whether ignorant or believe something else, usher them into this. Like, the whole thing is frustrating. So we are against this whole industry. So we're not for it.
What's funny too is they always say that we hate the industry, but we love what causes it. Right? Which is we don't put more money into public education, into college education. We took all that money out. We're okay with that. We never say anything about that. We never address that issue, but we hate the industry that's popped up around that because minority kids and poor kids want to go to college. Because you got to remember, her father paid for her college.
I mean, we all know why I don't. To say I don't care for her isn't even really appropriate. I don't find her to be a valuable source of information because she has literally no experience with any of it.
Well,
she's
none
never
of them
been
do.
poor. She's right. But her especially, she literally doesn't even have life experience to support even in her own personal finance journey, which,
Well,
call
I mean,
me out in the comments below if you feel like it, but she's not had much she's had to go against or deal with.
Well, no, but it's...
So I just don't find her opinion to be terribly valid.
No, but it's true of her and her brother.
At least not to the rest of us.
Well, it's true of her and her brothers. I mean, all three of them, Dad paid for college. All three of them work for Dave Ramsey. Her husband works for Dave Ramsey. She never really had to look for a job. She never had to work her way up or earn anything. It's always been just sort of here. Right?
Right.
And yet she's up here lecturing people about how they're going to pay their bills.
When I don't know that that's anything that's ever been a concern for her.
She never had to think about it. She's never had to think about it. And none of these people have any background in finance, so that's
what you want.
Great way to put that, Rachel. The big thing for us is we're not glad because people aren't getting help. We're glad that the will they, won't they game is over and that you're not being lied to anymore and that you don't have this false hope and that you're in control now. You can actually do...
Well, who was being lied to? I don't get that. Did you? They never said it was guaranteed.
Their leaning is always that, like, the government is going to make you all these promises, but they're lying to you, etc. That's kind of that. It's that that's their sort of blanket belief on anything
right.
that the government is trying to institute. Is that they're like, here, we're going to help, but the Ramsey folks will claim that they're always going to screw it up, and so that's kind of the idea.
Yeah. So it's all just conservative jibber jabber. At the end of the day, well, let's look at their analysis of now what to do now that you're gonna have to pay back your loans. Are you ready to pay up? This shouldn't surprise you. That's the name of this video.
Big news. People have been waiting for this. They've been worried about it, and it's finally official. Student loan payments will restart in October. Can you believe it? Yes. The game of will they, won't they is no longer. We can all stop wondering.
Jeez. All right, so I want to go back through the history of this. Okay, this is from this article here that was by Andy Nova back in June 20th. So President Trump first announces the stay on federal student loans in March of 2020, right when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And then between Trump and Biden, the pause has been extended 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
It says here nearly all people eligible for the relief have taken advantage of it, with less than 1% of qualifying borrowers continuing to make payments on their debt.
Oh, boy.
Number one, that's insane. I understand people pausing when...
Well, why is that insane? I don't understand that. So they're saying most people that you had the moratorium, right? Quit making payments. Right? Well, I mean, I wouldn't in a normal situation. I'd make the payments and pay it down, right? Because I'm not getting any interest or anything like that. Yeah, it's a great advantage. But what would prevent people from making payments? Back in, I don't know, what was that thing that happened in 2020?
Well, an entire pandemic that made people not allowed or not able to go to work, or at least many of them.
Yeah, that killed over 1 million Americans. Yeah, that thing. Yeah, it's a wonder that's crazy. Why wouldn't these people just keep paying down their loans in the middle of a pandemic? Probably because they're more worried about can they get food. So
they're trying to keep their rents paid, their mortgages paid, their lights on, food on the table, and many of them weren't able to go to work in a normal sort of way.
Unemployment shot up to whatever it was, 30-40%, something ridiculous. I mean, yeah. Why weren't they paying their loans? John Deloney, 2 PhDs, working it out.
Right when the pandemic kicked off and everyone's got fired and everybody's like, hey, you can't come to work, I get that.
Okay, you got it. He does get it.
We've had the lowest unemployment in the history of the United States, and we've had job opportunities literally everywhere. And this thing has just been hanging over people. And George, you and I have taken the call over and over and over and over again. And for everybody else, you have, it's late June, so let's say it's the beginning of July, August, September. You have a 3 to 4 month runway to prepare for this thing. And George, nobody's going to do it. Everybody's going to wait until October and get so mad. Oh my gosh, this came, and then we got... Yes, you borrowed money and you signed your name to it. You had to pay all yours off. Yep. I had to pay 6 figures of mine off. It's just what we did. We signed up for it, and now we're all mad that they didn't wave the magic wand to make it go away. And here's one more funny thing, George. If, let's say, Biden had been able to just discharge all student loans back when he wanted to a year ago, we would have already run up X number of $100 million nationally.
Because we didn't stop
we didn't stop making student loans. So we didn't stop college, right? And so...
Well... Yeah, but that's the problem, right? That's the problem that we're trying to address here, is that college is too expensive. Why is it too expensive? Because we don't fund it. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't do that. Why do we owe so much? Because we got screwed. Because the universities, it's not their fault. If they're not getting money from the government, they have to charge students. Right? Am I wrong? Where are they going to get the money from? They're going to have to add fees. They're going to have to add tuition costs. That all gets dumped on the student. And then what happens is you have a government going, well, we'll let the students sign up on loans. Well, whose fault is that then ultimately? The government.
True.
And even then, okay, so what? We racked up another $100 million in student loan debt, right? Okay, can't we just forgive that too? If you could do it once, you could do it twice. So I don't know what they're bitching. I mean, they're talking in circles. I mean, is it just me or they're talking in circles? It's like it's an insurmountable problem, but they've already told you the solution, right? Yeah. Anyway. We'll finish up here
we'd
real
be
quick.
right back on the path to where we are right now. And so all of this is a big quagmire of a mess.
Yeah, I just looked at the recent numbers. We're at 1.6 trillion. And part of that is because nobody's paid off their loans in the past 3 years, so the number doesn't change much. It just gets added to. And the key here is, John, while payments restart in October, interest starts in September, which means your student loan debt will grow in balance if you don't do something about it. And so if I were you...
Which is true. You need to do something about it beforehand.
I wouldn't wait until September. I wouldn't wait until October. I would start paying it off right now. Find out exactly how much you owe. Chances are life has changed. Your loans could have been sold to another servicer. So you've got to go figure all...
Well, you might not be able to pay it off right now. But what you can do is you can, like we said, you can go through one of Biden's programs. So work with your student loan borrower and just say, hey, I would like to get to income-driven repayment, or I can't pay right now. I need to have this deferred, or I want to get on the 12-month on-ramp program. You're not going to see them mention that at all. Because then they'd have to concede that they were technically sort of semi-wrong about the student debt thing, that Biden wasn't serious about it. So, you know, are you okay or something?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't have any particular thought about that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll wrap this up real quick.
Pull this stuff out and get your head out of the sand and go, we got to make a plan.
And let's be really clear about what this plan means. And I think this is a hallmark of the show is we don't shy away from telling you hard truth, even when it's uncomfortable for everybody. If you are one of the millions of people who bought a car on some sort of 7-year note when cars were super expensive and you were able to make that loan work in your household income, not including your student loans, you got 3 months to sell that car. Period.
Oh.
If you bought a big, humongous house and you didn't take into account that you owe 6 figures in student loans, you're gonna have to sell your house because they're gonna take it from. You're gonna lose.
Jesus.
I guess I have mixed feelings about that.
Well, first off, if you're the hypothetical person that was able to take on these huge loans, but now you can't afford your student debt, I don't know. It seems like an unlikely pairing, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're not likely, if you don't have the income to support it, I feel like it's unlikely that you're going to get approved for those sorts of loans, because when you're being approved for new loans, they take into account the loans you have. And I, for one, did qualify for a mortgage during the pandemic time frame, and they were wanting information about what my student loan payments were going to be once they resumed.
Right.
So like that, I'm saying that is taken into account when they're approving you for a loan. So that's on one hand. I mean, on the other hand, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to like literally stare in the face and be like, if I really am going to have problems making these payments, is there something drastic I need to do so something drastic doesn't happen to me?
Sure.
I mean, I would rather sell my own car than have it repoed. I would like if that's really realistic, because your financial situation has somehow changed and you're not going to be able to afford these payments. I'd rather be proactive and take the bull by the horns myself rather than have something done to me.
My point on this is we're engaging now in a straw man argument, right? How many people of that 40 million that are going to now have to start paying back their loans, what percentage of them do you think bought a huge house and car that they can barely afford? And now they can't afford it to the point where like a 500 or whatever a month student loan payment is going to crush them. It's just such an...
I was saying before, that number, when you're qualified for loans, granted, I'll say, I think banks are willing to qualify you for more than what's maybe totally appropriate because they want to make money. But at the same time, they do take into account your other debt because they want to make money, which means they want you to be able to make the payment.
Sure, but my point is you're talking about such a negligible percentage of people that it's not even worth discussing. Most of those 40 million people that are going to owe the loans back are not making that much money. that they're in that position. They didn't go freaking hog wild during the pandemic because they could get loans. Ooh, I can get a loan now for a car, so I'm going to buy a $60,000 car, even though I only make $70,000 a year. It's not happening. They're creating a hypothetical that doesn't really exist, right? I mean, it would be like me creating a financial plan for a multimillionaire who can't afford a $300 a month payment. Okay, what does that look like? It's not a ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. It's not even worth discussing. That's my point. So we'll watch a little bit more of this, and we'll bogue out here because this is just going to get more crazy.
Lose all this mess. You got 3 to 4 months to get on this thing. But when we say make a plan, we don't mean like, well, I guess we're going to have to just stop buying organic grapes this month. For millions of you, this will be shapeshifter because you made long-term plans by borrowing money against a depreciating asset in a car, by buying a house you couldn't afford, with the idea that these were just going to magically go away. And they're not. They're not.
Yeah, everyone was under the illusion that they had an extra $400
Yeah.
a month.
Let's pause right here. So I have to say I'm irritated by his commentary. Like, you know, he's making jokes about, okay, I guess we're not going to buy organic grapes this month, but so like the judgment here is making me crazy because people can make the choice to alter their budgets in order to accommodate their student loan payments in whatever way they see fit. Maybe some people literally can look at their grocery budget and realize they can trim that quite a bit and get like half their student loan payment sort of figured out just by working that out. Maybe they don't have to sell their car. Maybe actually
Right.
that sort of thing will be sufficient. They'll change their cell phone plan. They're going to trim their food budget a little bit, and they actually think that they can make that work. Why are we suddenly telling these people they have to sell their freaking car? Because, you know, it feels like a damning them for a choice they made. And now this other choice to fix it's not valid. You need to like go back and see how bad you were by making the choice to keep your car.
Right. And we're ignoring the fact that you could potentially, depending on your situation, you could take the 12-month on-ramp program.
Right.
Through Biden, and then you can put this off for a little bit until you're in a better position or you can figure it out, right? We're ignoring the fact that you can try to get on an income-driven repayment program where this is more affordable until you can get to a position to figure it out. We're ignoring all the options. We're treating this like it's a credit card payment when it's not. We're treating it like you have to get rid of this. And that's not the case. The viewpoint is so narrow. They can sit there and gloat about, well, you're not getting student debt. Right? Even though we're not happy about it. We're not happy that that's the case. But right? And then they could sit there and go, well, but see, now you're really screwed. You're going to have to pay all this back, and you're really fucked. And it's like, but you aren't. You aren't. This is literally just like ridiculous bully behavior. I mean, it's just, see, they didn't go the way you wanted, so everything else sucks. Well, no. There's still other options here.
Yeah.
Right? That was kind of my point of showing that, is it's just, you know, and they don't, you notice they don't look at the financial options. They don't look at, well, like we went through them. Income-driven repayment, you know, you can have the 12-month on-ramp, there's some benefits with getting auto enrollment and federal tax, approved and things like that. So there's not like you're screwed here. You just got to figure out what the plan is. And if you can't figure out the plan, and for those who don't know or aren't informed, they'll at least be put onto a plan automatically, which they haven't talked about any of that. And that was kind of the joke about throwing them in at the end, is did they even really look at the court case or what happened? No. Did they talk about the court case? No. Did they talk about Biden's solution to that? No. Nope. They just jumped in and said, well, you're an asshole because you bought a car. So now you got to lose your car. You don't get to have it anymore. Just a punk kid on the playground, man. That's all it was. Anyway, anything else you want to add to that, or?
No, I feel like that's a good note.
Good.
Right there.
All right. Well, where can everybody catch you, Lace?
All right. As always, you can find articles by me, information about courses and workshops at mysensewithsense.com. If you want further information about any of that, or have anything you would like us to cover topic-wise, any videos you want us to comment on, you can feel free to email us. Duncan, where can they email us?
You can email us at gossipfinancead@outlook.com. It's down below. Otherwise, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Lacey. I will catch you guys next time. We'll catch you guys next time. So talk to you then. All right.